Nobody on Flight 623 knew they were flying with a war hero. The quiet woman in seat 12B never mentioned her past. But when air traffic control spoke her call sign, two A-10 Thunderbolts stopped their training mid-flight. What happened next would leave every passenger speechless and in tears. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Sarah Chen settled into seat 12B on Flight 623 from San Diego to Seattle. She wore a simple navy blazer and jeans, her black hair tied back in a neat bun. To anyone watching, she looked like another business traveler making the 3-hour flight up the West Coast. The flight attendant smiled as she passed by. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Water, please," Sarah replied softly, accepting the plastic cup with steady hands. These same hands had once controlled an A-10 Thunderbolt II through some of the most dangerous combat zones in modern warfare. But nobody on this flight knew that. The man beside her typed away on his laptop. Across the aisle, a young couple shared earbuds, watching something on their phone. 2 rows ahead, a teenager slept against the window. Nobody paid Sarah any attention. Nobody knew that the quiet woman in seat 12B carried a call sign that was spoken with respect in every A-10 squadron around the world. They called her Viper 1. For 6 years of active duty, that name had meant salvation to hundreds of ground troops under enemy fire. Sarah had flown over 350 combat missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. Her precision with the GAU-8 cannon was legendary. Her ability to deliver weapons danger close to friendly forces without error was unmatched. But that was before. Now, after 18 years in the Air Force, she was finally retiring. Tomorrow, she would start her new life as a civilian aviation consultant in Seattle. No more combat missions. No more radio chatter about troops in contact. No more desperate calls for close air support. Sarah sipped her water and looked out the window. The Boeing 737 climbed steadily through the clear afternoon sky. She tried to focus on the magazine in her lap, but her mind kept wandering. Retirement hadn't been easy to accept. For months, she had questioned whether she was making the right choice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," came the announcement. "We're currently cruising at 35,000 feet. Weather looks perfect all the way to Seattle. We should arrive right on schedule." Sarah glanced at her watch. On time, just like the captain promised. In the military, timing meant everything. Being 30 seconds late with air support could mean soldiers died. She had never been late. Not once in 350 missions. As they flew north along the coast, Sarah noticed something through her window. 2 dark shapes in the distance, flying lower than the commercial airliner. Her trained eye immediately recognized them. A-10 Thunderbolt IIs. The distinctive silhouette was unmistakable. Twin engines, straight wings, and that massive cannon jutting from the nose. Sarah watched with professional interest as the 2 Warthogs maintained their course below. They were probably running a training exercise somewhere over the military ranges that dotted this part of the country. The businessman beside her noticed her staring. "Military jets." "A-10s," Sarah answered simply. "Close air support aircraft. Best in the world for protecting ground troops." The man nodded without much interest and returned to his spreadsheet. He had no idea that the woman beside him had flown that exact aircraft type in some of the most intense battles of recent wars. Sarah continued watching the distant Warthogs. They appeared to be conducting standard formation training. She could almost hear the radio calls in her mind, the clipped professional exchanges that had once been the soundtrack of her life. Then something changed. The lead A-10 broke formation sharply. His wingman followed immediately. Instead of continuing their exercise, both aircraft began climbing toward the commercial flight's altitude. Sarah frowned. That wasn't normal training behavior. In the cockpit of Flight 623, Captain Mike Stevens was monitoring the routine flight when his radio crackled with an unusual transmission. Alaska 623, Denver Center. Be advised, we have military traffic requesting information about your passenger manifest. They're asking specifically about a Sarah Chen. Do you show that passenger on board? Captain Stevens exchanged a confused look with his co-pilot, Lisa Park. In 25 years of flying, he had never received such a request. Denver Center, Alaska 623. That's an unusual request. Can you clarify? Alaska 623, the request is coming from Mountain Home Air Force Base. They have A-10 aircraft in your vicinity on a training mission. The flight lead is asking if Sarah Chen is aboard your aircraft. Co-pilot Park quickly checked the passenger manifest on her tablet. Captain, we do show a Sarah Chen in seat 12B. This is strange. Why would the military ask about a specific passenger? Captain Stevens keyed his microphone again. Denver Center, Alaska 623. Confirmed, passenger Sarah Chen is on board. What's this about? There was a pause. Then the controller's voice returned, now filled with amazement. Alaska 623, I'm being told by Mountain Home Operations that your passenger Sarah Chen is a retired A-10 pilot with the call sign Viper 1. The A-10 flight lead is requesting permission to suspend training operations to render honors. In the cabin, Sarah felt a familiar chill as she watched both A-10s changing course dramatically. They were clearly abandoning their training mission. Something was happening, and her instincts told her it involved more than just routine flying. The intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We're receiving some unusual communications regarding military aircraft in the area. There's no safety concern, but we may experience a slight delay as we coordinate with military traffic. Sarah's heart began to pound. She had kept her military service private since announcing her retirement. The airline didn't know. Her fellow passengers didn't know. She had traveled under her real name, never advertising her background. But somehow, the A-10 pilots in this airspace had discovered her presence. Through her window, she could now see both warthogs climbing directly toward the commercial flight. This was definitely not training anymore. The aircraft moved with the precision and purpose she remembered from combat operations. In the lead A-10, Major Alex Morrison couldn't believe what he had just heard from air traffic control. Sarah Chen, call sign Viper 1, was aboard that Alaska Airlines flight currently cruising through his training area. Every A-10 pilot knew that name. Razor 2, you copy that transmission? Morrison asked his wingman over the tactical frequency. Roger, Razor lead, came the immediate reply from Captain James Rodriguez in the second aircraft. Viper 1 is on that Alaska flight. This is incredible. Morrison had studied Sarah Chen's combat record during his initial A-10 training. She had flown more close air support missions than almost any other pilot in the aircraft's history. Her cannon accuracy was legendary. Her tactical innovations were still taught to every new Warthog driver. She had saved more lives than anyone could count. Mountain Home Base, Razor lead requesting permission to suspend training and render honors to Viper 1 aboard Alaska 623. The response came immediately from base operations. Razor lead, permission granted. Coordinate with Denver Center for proper separation. Wing commander is monitoring this personally. Make it perfect. Morrison felt the weight of the moment. He was about to fly a tribute mission to one of the greatest A-10 pilots who had ever strapped into the cockpit. Back aboard Flight 623, passengers were starting to notice the military aircraft outside their windows. Conversation stopped as people pressed against the glass, pointing at the two warthogs now clearly visible in the distance. "What are those planes doing?" asked a woman holding a small child. "I think they're coming toward us," said an elderly man, his voice filled with wonder. "I was in the army 40 years ago. I've never seen anything like this on a commercial flight." Sarah remained silent, but inside she was fighting mixed emotions. Part of her was deeply moved that active pilots would honor her service this way. Another part was uncomfortable with the public attention. The businessman beside her had forgotten about his laptop entirely. "Ma'am, you seem to know what those aircraft are. Any idea why they're flying toward us like this?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "They're A-10 Thunderbolts. I think they might be honoring a veteran on this flight." "Really, someone important?" "Someone who served," Sarah replied quietly. In the cockpit, Captain Stevens was receiving continuous communications from both Denver Center and the A-10 flight lead. Alaska 623, Denver Center. The military flight lead is requesting to speak directly with passenger Sarah Chen if possible. They want to coordinate a formal tribute as you continue toward Seattle. Co-pilot Park looked at her captain with disbelief. "Mike, who is this woman? The military doesn't stop training missions to honor passengers on commercial flights." Captain Stevens shook his head. "I don't know, Lisa, but she must be someone extraordinary." Minutes later, a flight attendant gently approached Sarah's seat. "Ms. Chen, I'm sorry to bother you, but the captain has asked to speak with you privately. Could you come to the galley area?" Sarah's pulse quickened as she followed the attendant forward. Other passengers watched curiously, sensing something unusual was happening. In the galley, the flight attendant spoke quietly. "Ms. Chen, I don't fully understand what's happening, but air traffic control has informed our captain that military aircraft are out there specifically because of you. The pilots want to honor your service. The captain would like to know if you'll speak with them over the radio." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. She had hoped for a quiet transition to civilian life. But the Brotherhood of Military Aviation had other plans. "Yes," she said finally. "I'll speak with them." Soon, Sarah sat in the cockpit jump seat wearing the captain's spare headset. Captain Stevens had tuned to the frequency the A-10s were using. "Viper 1, this is Razor Lead on guard. Ma'am, it is an absolute honor to share this airspace with you today." Sarah keyed the microphone, her voice steady despite the emotions inside. "Razor Lead, this is Viper 1. The honor is mine. You're flying some beautiful formations out there, Major. Ma'am, we've got clearance from Denver Center to conduct a formal tribute as you continue to Seattle. If you're willing, we'd like to escort you home." Sarah looked out the cockpit windows at the two A-10s now holding perfect formation with the airliner. Those gray war machines brought back a flood of memories. "Razor Lead, Viper 1. I'd be honored by your escort." What followed was 20 minutes of the most precise formation flying Sarah had ever witnessed from a civilian cockpit. Major Morrison and Captain Rodriguez positioned their A-10s in perfect escort formation, one on each side of the airliner. They maintained exact spacing and altitude as Flight 623 continued north. The air traffic controllers had never seen anything like it. Word spread quickly, and soon every available controller was watching their radar screens in amazement. Inside the cabin, passengers crowded every window. The young couple who had been watching their phone were now filming the military jets. The elderly Army veteran had tears streaming down his face. The woman with the child was explaining that Special Guardian planes were protecting their flight. The businessman who had been sitting next to Sarah throughout the flight now realized that the quiet woman who had correctly identified the aircraft was far more than she appeared. When Sarah returned to her seat, he looked at her with new respect. "Ma'am, I don't know what you did in your service, but watching those pilots honor you like this, it must have been something incredible." Sarah smiled softly. "I just did my job. Same as they're doing now." As Flight 623 began its descent toward Seattle, the two A-10s executed a perfect breakaway maneuver. Major Morrison rolled his aircraft inverted and pulled up and away in a climbing spiral. Captain Rodriguez followed in an identical maneuver. The formation break was so precise it looked choreographed. "Viper 1, Razor Lead," came Morrison's voice one final time. "Thank you for your service, ma'am. It was an honor to fly with a legend. Razor Lead, Viper 1. Fly safe. Bring everyone home." As the A-10s disappeared back toward their training area, Flight 623 continued its descent. The passengers erupted in spontaneous applause, though most still didn't fully understand what they had witnessed. During the approach, Captain Stevens made an announcement that everyone aboard would remember for years. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been flying commercial aircraft for 25 years. I have never experienced anything like what just happened. We were just escorted by 2 United States Air Force A-10 aircraft in tribute to one of our passengers, a retired military pilot with the call sign Viper 1. While I don't know all the details of her service, the unprecedented honor shown by those young pilots tells us everything we need to know about the person we've been privileged to fly with today." The entire cabin turned to look at Sarah, still sitting quietly in seat 12B. She stood slowly, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you all for sharing this flight with me," she said simply. "And thank you for your patience. Sometimes the past catches up with the present in unexpected ways." As passengers filed off after landing, many stopped to shake Sarah's hand or simply nod their respect. The woman with the child thanked her for her service and told her daughter to remember this day. The elderly Army veteran saluted, one warrior honoring another across decades and service branches. Sarah was among the last to leave the aircraft. As she gathered her bag, Captain Stevens emerged from the cockpit. "Ma'am, I don't know what you did during your military service, but today was one of the most moving experiences of my career. Those young pilots didn't just honor you. They honored everyone who has served." Sarah nodded, her voice catching. "Captain, they reminded me why I was proud to serve. Sometimes we forget in the transition to civilian life that what we did mattered. Today they made sure I remembered." As Sarah walked through the jet bridge into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, she felt something shift inside her. For months, she had struggled with leaving behind the identity that had defined her for nearly 2 decades. She had worried about becoming just another civilian, forgotten and anonymous. But today, 2 young A-10 pilots had reminded her that some things don't fade simply because you change uniforms. The call sign Viper 1 would live on in the stories told in ready rooms, in the tactical manuals that bore her innovations, and in the lives of soldiers who had gone home because she had been overhead when they needed her most. The terminal buzzed with normal activity. Sarah moved through the crowd, once again unnoticed. Her moment in the spotlight was over. But as she approached baggage claim, she noticed something unusual. A crowd had gathered at the large windows overlooking the airfield, all pointing and talking excitedly. Sarah approached and saw what had captured their attention. The 2 A-10 Thunderbolts were performing a ceremonial flyby of the airport. They flew in tight formation, rolled inverted in unison, then separated in opposite directions before coming back together in a perfect diamond formation. "Did you see that?" an excited teenager asked his mother. "Those military jets have been flying around the airport. Someone said they were escorting a flight that just landed." The mother, wearing a shirt with military insignia, watched with knowing eyes. "That's a tribute formation, honey. Someone important was on that flight. Someone those pilots respect enough to use their training time to honor." Sarah stood among them, watching her former aircraft dance through the sky with the grace that only came from countless hours of training. The sight stirred memories she had been trying to keep locked away. She remembered her first combat mission in an A-10. The nervous excitement of flying into hostile territory, the focused intensity of finding and engaging enemy targets, the overwhelming relief of hearing that friendly forces were safe because of her actions. She remembered the mission over Afghanistan when she had spent 6 hours orbiting a remote outpost, providing continuous close air support as enemy forces tried to overrun the position. She had made 14 attack runs that day, expending every round and returning with her aircraft heavily damaged. She remembered the night mission in Iraq when she had guided a trapped patrol through hostile territory, coordinating their movement while engaging enemy positions. That mission had earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross, but more importantly, it had brought 10 soldiers home to their families. "Ma'am, excuse me," came a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a young man in his 20s wearing an Air Force uniform. I'm sorry to bother you, but I was on duty at Mountain Home when the call came in about your flight. Are you Sarah Chen, call sign Viper 1? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. The young airman's face lit up. Ma'am, I'm Airman First Class Martinez. I work in base operations. I coordinated with Denver Center when Major Morrison requested permission to honor you. I just wanted to say thank you for your service. My older sister is Army infantry. She's told me stories about A-10 pilots who saved her unit more than once. When I heard your call sign today, I knew we were dealing with a legend. Other people nearby began to take notice. Word spread quickly that the woman standing among them was connected to the military display outside. An elderly man approached. My son is serving overseas right now. Army, stationed in the Middle East. Are you the reason those planes honored that flight? Sarah nodded gently. I served with the Air Force for many years. Those pilots out there are continuing the mission, protecting people like your son. The man grasped her hand firmly. Thank you. Thank you for watching over our troops. A woman in business attire pushed forward. I was on your flight, sitting 5 rows behind you. I had no idea we were traveling with a hero. What you've done for our country. I don't have adequate words. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the attention. This was exactly what she had hoped to avoid. But as she looked around at the faces surrounding her, young and old, military and civilian, all united in their respect for service, she realized that perhaps anonymity wasn't what she truly wanted after all. A young Air Force officer approached nervously. Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Chen. No relation, he added with a slight smile. I just finished A-10 training at Davis-Monthan. We studied your tactics in ground school. The Chen maneuver is still taught as standard procedure for danger close support missions. It's an honor to meet you. Sarah smiled at the mention of the tactical technique that bore her name. It had been developed during a mission when she needed to deliver ordnance within 75 meters of friendly forces. The technique had been adopted throughout the A-10 community and had saved countless lives. As the afternoon progressed, the crowd gradually dispersed. People had connections to make, families to meet, lives to return to. But what they had witnessed would stay with them. Sarah finally made her way to baggage claim to collect her suitcase. The crowds had thinned, the excitement had faded, and she was once again just another passenger. But she wasn't the same woman who had boarded Flight 623 in San Diego that morning. Something fundamental had changed. She had been reminded of who she was, where she came from, and why it mattered. Sarah pulled out her phone as she walked toward the exit. Tomorrow, she would begin her new job as an aviation consultant, helping design training programs for the next generation of pilots. It was a different mission than combat, but it was no less important. She had one more identity to build, one more chapter to write. But now she knew that she would always carry Viper 1 with her, not as a burden from the past, but as a foundation for whatever came next. As Sarah stood near the terminal exit, waiting for her ride, she noticed a local television crew had set up nearby. They were interviewing people about the military flyby that had captured everyone's attention. A reporter spotted her and began walking over, but Sarah shook her head politely and moved toward a quieter corner. She wasn't ready for that kind of attention yet. Maybe she never would be. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her former squadron commander, Colonel James Mitchell, who had somehow already heard about what happened. Saw the video online. The whole squadron is proud of you, Viper 1. You earned that tribute 1,000 times over. Welcome home. Sarah smiled and typed a quick reply. Thank you, sir. Tell the team I miss them. She looked up as a taxi pulled to the curb. But before she could move toward it, she heard someone call her name. Major Chen. Sarah turned to see a young woman in her early 20s, wearing jeans and a college sweatshirt. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Yes. Sarah replied gently. The young woman took a deep breath. My name is Jessica Miller. My brother was Sergeant David Miller, 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers. He was killed in Afghanistan in 2019. Sarah's heart tightened. She knew where this was going. Jessica continued, her voice shaking slightly. Before he died, he wrote me a letter. He told me about a mission where his unit was pinned down by enemy fire. He said an A-10 pilot with the call sign Viper 1 stayed overhead for hours, making gun runs that saved their lives. He said you were the reason he survived that day to write that letter. Tears began streaming down Jessica's face. I saw the news report about the flyby. I saw your name. I had to come here. I had to thank you. Because of you, I got 3 more years with my brother. 3 more Christmases, 3 more birthdays. He got to see me graduate high school. He got to walk me to my first day of college. Sarah felt her own tears forming. This was the part of military service that never got easier, meeting the families, understanding the weight of every decision, every mission, every moment. Your brother was a brave soldier, Sarah said softly. I remember that mission. The Rangers never quit fighting, even when things looked impossible. They were heroes, every one of them. Jessica stepped forward and hugged Sarah tightly. Thank you. Thank you for giving us more time with him. Thank you for bringing him home that day. They stood there for a long moment, 2 people connected by a day of combat thousands of miles away and years in the past. When Jessica finally stepped back, she was smiling through her tears. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. It still matters. As Jessica walked away, Sarah had to sit down on a nearby bench. The emotions of the day were finally catching up with her. She had spent months trying to leave the military behind, trying to move forward into a new life. But today had shown her something important. You can't really leave it behind. And maybe you shouldn't try to. The military wasn't just a job she had done. It was part of who she was. The missions she had flown, the lives she had touched, the soldiers she had protected, all of it was woven into the fabric of her identity. Trying to cut that away would be like trying to remove her own shadow. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a group message from several of her former squadron mates. The message included a photo of them gathered in the ready room, holding up a hand-painted sign that read, Viper 1, Legend. Sarah laughed despite her tears. Those idiots. She loved every one of them. Another message came through, this one from Major Morrison, the pilot who had led the tribute formation. Ma'am, I hope the tribute today was appropriate. Every pilot in our squadron considers it an honor to follow in your footsteps. The Warthog community is better because of what you gave us. Thank you for showing us the way. Sarah typed a response, Major, your formation flying was outstanding. Take care of that aircraft and take care of your wingman. The mission continues. As she finally stood to leave the airport, Sarah realized that retirement didn't mean the end of her story. It just meant a new chapter. She would teach, she would mentor, she would pass on everything she had learned. The next generation of pilots would benefit from her experience, just as she had benefited from those who came before her. Outside, the Seattle sky was beginning to darken. Sarah could see the lights of the city coming on, one by one. Somewhere out there, Major Morrison and Captain Rodriguez were probably landing their A-10s back at Mountain Home, debriefing their unusual mission, and telling the story of how they had escorted a legend home. And somewhere else, soldiers were on patrol, hoping that if they needed help, someone like Viper 1 would be overhead, ready to answer the call. Sarah climbed into the taxi and gave the driver her address. As they pulled away from the airport, she looked back one more time at the sky. She couldn't see the A-10s anymore, but she knew they were out there. Flying, training, preparing, protecting. Just like she had done for 18 years. Just like she would continue to do, in a different way, for the rest of her life. The quiet woman who had boarded Flight 623 as just another passenger had arrived in Seattle as something more, a reminder that heroes walk among us every day, usually unrecognized, always ready to serve when called upon. And sometimes, just sometimes, the sky itself opens up to salute them home. The taxi drove through the evening traffic of Seattle, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets from an earlier rain. Sarah watched the world pass by her window, people walking home from work, families having dinner at restaurants, couples holding hands on street corners. Normal life. The life she was now part of. Her phone buzzed one more time. It was an unknown number, but the message made her smile. Major Chen, this is Captain Rodriguez, Razor 2 from today's formation. I wanted to tell you something personal. My father was a forward air controller in Iraq. He worked with A-10 pilots regularly. Before he passed away last year, he told me that if I ever met a pilot named Viper 1, I should tell her that Groundhog 6 sends his regards. He said you saved his team twice in 1 week back in 2017. Thank you for bringing my dad home. Sarah's hands trembled as she typed her response. Captain, your father was one of the best facts I ever worked with. It was an honor to fly for him. He raised a fine pilot. Keep making him proud. She leaned back in the seat and closed her eyes. This was what service meant. Not the medals or the recognition, but the connections, the invisible threads that linked one generation to the next, one mission to another, one life saved to a family kept whole. The taxi pulled up to a small apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. Sarah paid the driver and grabbed her suitcase. As she walked toward the entrance, she noticed an American flag hanging from a neighbor's balcony, gently moving in the evening breeze. Tomorrow would be the first day of her new life. She would meet her new colleagues, learn about civilian aviation training protocols, and begin the process of becoming something other than a combat pilot. But tonight, she was still Viper 1. And she always would be. Inside her apartment, Sarah unpacked her small bag and changed into comfortable clothes. She made herself a cup of tea and stood by the window, looking out over the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in this city were the families of soldiers she had protected. Somewhere out there were people whose lives had been touched by her service, even if they never knew her name. And somewhere, high above in the darkening sky, pilots were still flying. Still training, still preparing to answer the call when it came. Sarah raised her cup in a silent toast to them all, to the ones still serving, to the ones who had served before, and to the ones who would come after. The mission continued, as it always had and always would. She was home now. Not just in Seattle, but in the understanding that she would never truly leave the sky behind. It was in her blood, in her heart, in every beat of her pulse. Viper 1 was home. And the sky would always remember.